Welcome, everybody. Buenos días a todos. Good morning, everybody. My name is Leopoldo Miranda. Leopoldo Miranda Castro. Otherwise, my mom will kill me if I don't mention the Castro part. So, just to tell you a little bit about me, I work for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service in the Southeast region based in Atlanta, Georgia. I am the Assistant Regional Director for Ecological Services for the Southeast, Puerto Rico, and the U.S. Virgin Islands. If you see my head, that's because of all the issues we deal down there. I don't have any hair left. But we deal with all the endangered species controversies, all the habitat restoration, recovery of the species. So it's a pretty neat job. And we have a wonderful team of folks across the Southeast. And I'm really honored to be leading a really nice team of folks from the Department of Interior. Well, today we at the Department of Interior sponsor several events over the year to promote greater understanding and awareness of the diverse cultures. Today, many of our employees are joining us through the internet in a live stream webcast. So everybody out there in the regions and across the nation, welcome and thank you for listening and looking at this event. So we are celebrating the National Hispanic Heritage Month that is celebrated every year between September 15th and October 15th, where we recognize the contributions made and the important presence of Hispanic and Latino Americans to the United States and to celebrate our heritage and culture. This year's the Department of Interior's theme is for the National Hispanic Heritage Month is Hispanics, a preservation of history, a present of action, and a future of success. We use the term Hispanic or Latino to refer to Puerto Ricans like myself, Cubans, Dominicans, South and Central American, or people from other Spanish cultures, origins, regardless of their race. According to the U.S. Census back in 2010, over 50 million people, or about 16% of the U.S. population, are of Hispanic or Latino origin. That is a really important statistics because right now, only about 8 to 9% is actually represented in the workforce. Hispanics have had a profound and positive influence on our country through a strong commitment to family, faith, and service. They have engaged and enhanced and shaped our national character with centuries-old traditions that reflects multi-ethnic and multicultural customs on their community. The National Hispanic Heritage Month begins each year on September 15, as I mentioned before, and this is the anniversary of the independence of at least 5 Latin American countries. For example, Costa Rica, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras, and Nicaragua celebrate their independence on September 15th. Other countries like Mexico celebrate their independence on September 16th, not Cinco de Mayo. Chile, September 18, Belize on September 21st. Also, El Día de la Raza, also known as Columbus Day or Native American Day, is celebrated on October 12th. Please share in this special annual tribute by learning and celebrating the generations of Hispanic Americans who have positively influenced and enriched our nation and our society. Thank you so much. So now I would like to introduce our keynote speaker, Mr. Bruce Stewart. Bruce currently serves as the Deputy Director for Training, Compliance, and Strategic Initiatives in the Office of Diversity and Inclusion of the Office of Personnel and Management, OPM. And he is responsible for the coordinated implementation of the President's Executive Order on Diversity and Inclusion. Bruce has been involved in numerous leadership and diversity initiatives at the local, state, and national levels. He has lectured on diversity at several leading educational institutions, including MIT, University of Kansas, and the Naval NCO Academy and the Harvard University. Bruce recently completed and finished a book on diversity leadership titled The Cultural Leadership, the new chemistry of leading differently. So with that, Bruce.
All right. Well, good morning. No, let's do a little better. Good morning. Good morning. And those of you on TV watching us, good morning to you also. So I'm happy and thrilled to be here today to talk to you regarding unconscious biases, and not just how they particularly affect folks of Hispanic heritage, but everybody, because these are some of the things that we have in common. But before I get to my remarks, there's always something that's very important for us to do, and that is I want everybody to stand up and shake your hands and introduce yourself to the folks next to you. Go ahead, quickly, quickly. Quickly, people, quickly. All right, all right, all right. Hey, sir, make your own date plans on your time, please. I only have 15 minutes here. Only 15 minutes. I'm watching you, yes. So what I'm going to talk to you today about is unconscious bias. I only got 15 or 13 minutes now, so I'm going to be quick, but not hurry too much. Again, I appreciate the invitation here. We try to get out and speak to a lot of folks regarding this important subject. Just real quickly, as I do with a lot of folks, I'm also a retired Air Force colonel, served 23 years, started my career in special operations attached to the Green Berets. Anybody jump out of airplanes? Okay. Trying to quit that, sir? Should be, yes. Took me a while. I was a slow learner. Initially started off, I was 6'3", and those of you on TV probably don't understand, but I'm really about 6'1" now. So did that. Just real quickly, anybody want to guess how many kids I have? Does anybody care? Not really. 7. Round of applause. Thank you very much. Now, the fellas will really be interested in this. Fellas, how many girls? One of the guys said 7. So negative so early. Actually 6. Guys, give me a round of applause. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. So me and my son know how to take orders real quickly. That's one thing that we do, and we do well. Now, just to show you what the impact of unconscious bias can be, because one of the things that we think is that this is kind of this, invisible thing that really doesn't have an impact. It's a nice thing to talk about, but how does it really impact our lives, not only with regard to everybody, but specifically with regard to Latinos and Hispanics trying to make their way in the federal service? Can anybody tell me what the average height of American male is? Average height of American male. 5'10" is correct. What is the average height of a Fortune 100 CEO? Average height of Fortune 100 CEO? Almost 6'3". Average height of American male is what? Average height of Fortune 500 or Fortune 100 CEO is what? That's the difference of? Okay, no MIT grads here. That's okay. That's all right. 5 inches, right? So why is it that Fortune 100 CEOs are almost 6'3" when the average height of American male is only 5'10"? The reason is that we are socialized at a very early age to regard height as something that is typical of leaders and people in authority positions. And it starts at a very early age because when we're growing up, the first thing that we're doing is looking up. And we're looking up to folks, right, who are in positions of authority, teachers, parents, those type of things. Our brain makes that association, that connection to height being powerful and being typical of leadership, and we never forget that unconsciously. So we give preference to people who are taller. Nobody here would justify that somebody should be chosen as a CEO or whatever the case may be because of their height or lack thereof. Agreed? The other thing that nobody would say is that we shouldn't have preferences not only for people who are taller, but also people who are attractive, or people who meet the weight standards, or people of certain sexual orientations, or people of certain genders, or whatever the case may be. And what I'm here to tell you all is that this implicit bias, this concept of unconscious bias is, in my opinion, and what we've been studying a lot in the office, one of the major reasons that not only Hispanics are having a difficult time seeing themselves reflected in leadership and represented throughout the federal workforce as they are represented in the country, but also other groups. And that's what I'm here to talk to you about today, that this is not some concept that's invisible or kind of ambiguous. This is a concept that really has a significant impact on how we see ourselves. Now, with regard to Hispanics, I like to watch the Spanish television network, right? What's the name of it? Yeah, absolutely. Now, one of the things that I've noticed, and just to show you how serious this can be, and it happens within every group, is that what I notice is that in watching that particular channel or network, most of the folks that I see in the leading positions, in the star positions, happen to be lighter-skinned Hispanics. I very rarely see darker-skinned Hispanics that might have Indian ancestry or whatever the case may be reflected on that television show or that television network. And the same holds true for other groups. So this is not just something that happens outside to Hispanics to the inside, but this happens to every group all the time. And especially with regard to Hispanics, as we're talking here today. One of the other unconscious biases with regard specifically to the Latino group, right, is that accent. And now all of us would say that we don't discriminate against anybody because of their accent or whatever, because, I mean, that's ridiculous to have an association with somebody's intellect or education level based on their accent. But guess what the research has told us? We do. Right? And it's not only a Hispanic or Latino accent, but it's also a Southern accent. It's also any accent that's unnatural or not typical of the particular region that we're in. Does everybody understand? So that's the situation that we find ourselves in. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that going quickly. Now, one of the things that happens with these unconscious biases is that people have a tendency to feel excluded. And I like to show this slide here. That first row of pictures up is in your brain. This is an fMRI. In your brain, when you feel excluded, that's where the pain is registered. Everybody see that? Now, that lower group of pictures is in your brain when you feel physical pain. That's where it's registered in your brain. You see any similarities there? When people feel excluded, because they have an accent, or because they're not tall, or because they're the wrong gender, or wrong sexual orientation, or whatever the case may be, their brain registers that pain no differently than it registers physical pain. So it doesn't differentiate between feeling excluded and knocking your knee or stubbing your toe or twisting your elbow or whatever the case may be. This is serious business, you guys. And not only for Latinos, but a serious business for everybody, because Latinos can't be represented in the federal government all on their own. They require the help of every group, just like every group requires the help of every other group. Agreed? All right. Anybody know what that boat is? Titanic. Anybody know what happened to it? Yeah, it sunk. Okay, good. Oh, I got a smart class here. Thank you. So can anybody tell me how many folks actually perished as a result of the Titanic sinking? Over 1,500. Now, what's interesting is that here a few years ago, they actually found photographs of the iceberg that sank the Titanic. And what they noticed on this particular photograph is that there was a 200 by 400 square foot flat surface. And the experts surmised that if the captain and the crew, instead of putting the ropes and ladders into the water, instead, if they would have put it onto the iceberg, they would have had a good chance of saving most of those 1,500 passengers that perished. Now, what's interesting about the passengers that perished, they didn't perish because they drowned. They perished because of hypothermia, because it took over 4 hours for the rescue ships to get there. And the only thing that I'm saying here, and my point here is that we can't be like the captain and the crew of the Titanic. Our assumptions about each other has to change. We're not fighting a battle, generally speaking, in the 21st century about overt racism or prejudice against Latinos. What we're fighting a battle right now is about unconscious biases that we have against particular groups when we think that we're treating them fairly. That's the challenge that we have, because nobody will admit that they're prejudiced or discriminatory when it comes to Latinos. But in fact, the research is clear. As a group, they suffer from racism and discrimination and prejudice at all levels of most organizations. And that has to be fixed. Anybody know these folks? Anybody heard of Claudette Colvin? Anybody? What about Rosa Parks? Show of hands here in the room. How many folks heard of Rosa Parks? Maybe everybody, right? So Claudette Colvin, 8 months before Rosa Parks didn't give up her seat in the bus, Claudette Colvin didn't give up her seat. But you never heard of Claudette Colvin, but you've heard of Rosa Parks. The reason is that Rosa Parks, when she went to jail and got arrested, she had a diverse social network. So she was only connected to blacks in the civil rights movement and through the NAACP, but she also was connected to white women and white socialites in that area who, when she went to jail, went into a complete uproar. And so it mobilized the community. Has anybody heard of Alfred Russel Wallace? What about Charles Darwin? Alfred Russel Wallace, about 10 years before Charles Darwin did, came up with the theory of evolution through natural selection. But Alfred Russel Wallace worked a lot by himself. Charles Darwin always sent his papers out to get reviewed and criticized by other folks. He had a diverse social network. That's why you've heard of Charles Darwin. What about William Dawes? Anybody heard of William Dawes? William Dawes, but you have heard of Paul Revere. William Dawes, on the other side of the town, warned that the British was coming. But you haven't heard of him. Most people haven't, but they've heard of Paul Revere. The reason? Paul Revere spent a lot of time in taverns. That was a joke. I mean, he did, but however you can make social connections, that's what you use. But the fact of the matter is, when Paul said the British were coming, people believed him because he had a diverse social network. My only point here is that with regard to Latinos or anybody else, if you want to be successful, the research is clear, right? I mean, we can put all the processes and policies in place, but at the end of the day, it's about the individual taking advantage of the opportunities that they have. And one of the ways you take advantage of these opportunities is having a diverse social network. And what I mean by that is, no matter what group or identity that you embrace, you have to make sure that you surround yourselves with people who don't look like you or come from that particular identity if you want to be successful and be able to reach your potential, reach the potential that you would like. It's been pretty clear. So one of the things that we like to talk about when we go around and talk a little bit is that, and I think everybody can see this, is that you are smarter like this. Everybody get the concept of the image? When we're connected and you're connected to different people who can bring you different types of information and access from different groups that you would know nothing about, that's when you're at your smartest. And not just smart intellectually, but smart when it comes to being able to adapt to different situations and get inside information about your career or about how to influence better your organization. You are less smart like this. Everybody see that? You are less smart when you surround yourselves with what I call our tribal nature. And if you give in to just surrounding yourselves in your cliques and clans of people who look and think and act just like you do, you will be less successful and you won't be able to reach your potential as much as you could based on the prior slide. And then finally, and even less smart like this. And sometimes the federal government, sometimes we don't do everything great, but one of the things that we do great is create a bureaucracy, right? Especially a hierarchy. And that even exacerbates the thing that I've been talking about more. So just real quickly, let me go through this unconscious cycle. So the way we talk about it is it starts with brains. The way our brains are formed elicits biases. Those biases creates boundaries between us, and those boundaries at the end of the day reinforce these rules of our brains, rules of our socialization process that feed right back into how we think. So what I want to talk about, if I can get everybody just do me a favor, I want to talk about how the brain does this real quickly. If everybody would put their fist in the air and put their thumb inside their fist and repeat after me, fight the power. Okay, that was just I didn't mean. Okay, we're not taking over the federal government here, so you can put your fist down back there. So let me just say, so it's not so this unconscious bias deal. This is a thing that afflicts all of us in all groups. Everybody understand? So when I had you put your fist up, it's just a model of the brain that we call the triune model. So this outside part is what we call the prefrontal cortex. It's the human computer. The prefrontal cortex located right behind your forehead, right? It's the last part of your brain to develop. That part of your brain doesn't develop till about age 25. And the great thing about it is that it tamps down your impulses. Anybody have teenagers in here? Then you understand what I'm talking about, right? Because this part of the brain that tamps down impulses hasn't been fully matured yet. And for some of us, our significant others still think it hasn't been fully matured, but that's another deal there. So when I had you place your thumb inside the mammalian part of the brain of your brain is the part of the brain that we have in common with mammals, and it's our emotional center. So if I was to ask you to think about a song that you grew up with that you really loved, you could automatically bring back those sights, sounds, and smells instantly because the emotional part signifies what's important to us to remember. And then finally, the reptilian part is this wrist part where I had you put your fist up, and basically this is the fight, flight, or freeze part of our brain. This is what moves us to action, right? But here's the problem. So I gave you three parts of the brain. The mammalian part and the reptilian part, they team up against your prefrontal cortex. Your prefrontal cortex is what stops you from doing things that you know better not to do. Unfortunately, a lot of the time, right, it gets teamed up by the reptilian and mammalian to overcome that. And so a lot of the time we act on instinct, and a lot of the time it's unconscious. And that's the conundrum that we find ourselves in. I'm not going to do this, but I am going to do this one. You got 6 seconds to tell me how many F's are in that paragraph. Go. Time's up. How many? 6. How many of you got 6? All right. Smart folks over here, right? All right. Those of us that didn't get 6, why didn't we get 6? Oh, right? Because our brain is looking for F where? At the front. And so that's how our unconscious works. We think we're doing it right when in fact our unconscious brain is doing something completely different. So I got a couple more minutes. I'm going to get ready to wrap this up. But there's 3 unconscious biases that I always like to talk about. I'm going to go ahead and build this up real quickly. So the first one is what we call the like me bias, right? And the like me bias is basically what it says there, is that we have a tendency to surround ourselves with people that are like us. Not only how we look, but also how we think, where we work, all that kind of thing. If you want to be successful, one of the things that we've been telling each group is that as an individual, you have to surround yourself with people that are different. Does that make sense? And that requires you getting out of your comfort zone. I know it might not sound like rocket science, but it makes a big difference. The second unconscious bias that impacts us and that we've seen that has had a significant impact in the workplace is this whole thing with regard to confirmation bias. I happen to be kind of a political guy, and I'm liberal, so what network do I watch? MSNBC, right? I love Rachel Maddow. Go, Rachel, go, Rachel, go. Right? Nobody else watches Rachel? Is it? Okay. Must be Fox folks here. All right. So, right? So our conservative brothers and sisters, they watch the Fox network. Now, the reason I watch MSNBC is because they reinforce my prior beliefs. So I get a big bag of popcorn, a big bowl of ice cream, and I just soak it up because my beliefs never get challenged. And while that might make me feel good, right, that is not the thing that can help me reach the level of potential that I need. That's not the thing that helps us as an organization or a federal government diversify like we need. We have to understand and respect other perspectives, right? We have to make sure that we're consciously aware of those confirmation biases that we have. So when somebody applies for us and we're a hiring manager that might have an accent, that has nothing to do with their intelligence or when they arrived in this country or whatever else, whatever other false assumptions we may put on them. All right? And then finally, broken windows bias. In the mid-'90s, crime was out of control in New York City. Is anybody here from New York City? Crime was out of control in say, the Times Square area. A lot of the shops, you know, were sexual in nature and that type of thing. So Mayor Giuliani and Police Chief Bratton in the mid-'90s came to New York City, and one of the things they wanted to do was reduce crime. The initial thought was to hire a significant number of more police officers. But before they did that, there was a criminologist doing some work in the Bronx. And what he found out was that any place there were broken windows, crime went up. When they went in and fixed those broken windows, crime went down. Hence, broken windows theory. The idea and the lesson for us is that we call it broken windows bias. And what we mean by that is the context and the situation matter a lot on people's perspectives and their performance. Right? So as leaders, if we don't show and model that we value diversity and inclusion, it has a much tougher time getting rooted in that particular organization than if it wasn't. All right? So 3 unconscious biases you have to be careful of: like me bias, confirmation bias, and broken windows bias. So I want to leave with what I call 3 rules to live by that we found out can be successful or help your success as an individual. First one is get out of your comfort zone. Everybody agree with that? Get out of your comfort zone. Life begins at the end of your comfort zone. And if you think about it, that's really true. If we challenge ourselves to be a little uncomfortable, we might have an opportunity to really start to turn this around. Second is respect other perspectives, right? Respect other perspectives. We have a tendency that to sometimes be encapsulated in our particular group or community. And we don't have an opportunity to really understand other groups, other communities, and we start getting into this belief cycle where it becomes reinforced and reinforced, just like me watching MSNBC all the time. The fact of the matter is, no matter whether you're Latino or African American or Asian American, whatever the case may be, you need to get out and make sure that you're part of other groups so we can lift our boats together. And then finally, you are smarter together. The problems that we face right now, especially within the Hispanic community, are challenging, hard problems. If they weren't challenging and hard problems, then they would have been solved by now. And it's not by the lack of trying, right? Just like the civil rights movement wasn't about the lack of trying. We tried busing and all that, and I looked at the research a few years ago, and do you know the schools are more segregated today than they were in the early 60s? So it's not a fact of not having good intentions, but we have to have a change in our mental model, and instead of focusing on the overt biases, we need to start focusing on the unconscious biases, those things that are invisible that keep us from each other. And then finally, we are called to be architects of the future, not as victims. So we can do this. And that's a positive message that we always want to make sure that we send to everybody is, and it coming from President Obama, we can do this if we work together. You guys have been great. I hope it's been informative. Thank you very much. Look forward to the panel.
Bruce, thank you for that wonderful speech, and I think that there's a lot of take-home messages. I would like to give you a little thank you present here from on behalf of the Department of Interior. Little book about the Smithsonian Book of National Wildlife Refuges. It's a nice, lot of really good pictures there. So, and a little certificate of appreciation. All right. For your participation. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Appreciate that. She wants us to open it so we can see it.
Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And now I would like to introduce Francisco Carrillo, the Deputy Director of Office in Intergovernmental and External Affairs for Department of Interior. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks for joining us today.
I'm a little taller, so don't hold that against me. But I'm really glad you all could be here, and I'll ask the panel to come up in a second, but I wanted to echo Bruce's comments that the challenges Hispanics face are not endemic to one community. If all the challenges we face as a Hispanic community are experienced by other communities as well. So that's why I think we worked hard with the Fish and Wildlife Service who are sponsoring this event, Julia and Deb and Inez, to put on a diverse panel so that you can hear the experiences of DOI employees that have newly gotten onboarded into the system and so, or recently gotten onboarded. And so I wanted you to hear their experiences and challenges so that we can take away some tools, some lessons, and some best practices. Because again, it's larger than just the Hispanic community. And you know, we've celebrated quite a bit Hispanic heritage, and every Cinco de Mayo, it's a good excuse to celebrate Hispanic heritage, and it's not Mexican Independence Day. So, and most of us don't even realize why Hispanic Heritage Month begins in the middle of the month and ends in the middle of the month. And I just recently learned because it was the Central American independence anniversaries. I always thought, because I'm a homer, I thought it was a Mexican American start time to coincide with Mexican Independence Day, but no, it's much bigger than that. So, and I'm glad that Leo mentioned the terms Hispanic or Latino, because honestly we go by both. We're just a newly homogeneous group that really is accepting and being recognized of this term Latino. So it's not like we just adopted this right away. It took time, and it's very regional how our different Hispanic communities are. You see Hispanics from New Mexico and Colorado, Chicanos in California, to Boricuas in New York, and so we're very regionally different, but I think now that we've realized our electoral power that we've really adopted the term Latino. But honestly, both terms apply, and as long as you are willing to engage the community, it doesn't matter what you call them, because they'll be receptive of you trying to engage them, especially in our programs and services. And that's why you know, I'm glad to be here on this panel, because my role is as a Deputy Director of Intergovernmental External Affairs, whatever that means, is to work with elected officials, work with partners, and work with stakeholders. But we can't do this, I can't do this work in a vacuum. I have to work with my Bureau counterparts, because you guys have the programs, the services that we deliver all Americans. And so my job is to help you engage stakeholders and communities and help the bureaus to further your mission. And we don't do this in a vacuum or for just because we're the Hispanics are the largest demographic in the country, but rather we need to provide a public service and a public good to all Americans, whether you're Hispanic, Asian American, Pacific Islander, you name it. So, and that's why I'm glad that this panel is really focused on the challenges that young and recent employees of DOI have encountered in getting onboarded. Hopefully that they'll provide some tools and experiences that you can learn, because we want this panel to be a time for action, a calling for us to work together, because we all talk about these issues, we all know them, but you know, what are we doing in our day-to-day jobs and lives to actually move the needle forward? So with that, I will call up the panelists, Damon, Vanessa, Anna, and Colette, and give you a quick introduction. Thank you all. So as you can see, it's a diverse panel because, again, I want to work with Fish and Wildlife Service to provide a service to our employees and our colleagues, and also so we can take home some lessons that apply to all communities, all Americans. Like I said, it's not just challenges that one community faces, but we all face different challenges. And so at the end of the table, we have Damon Ye, who's a volunteer with the Fish and Wildlife Service in International Affairs. He's a Bethesda, Maryland native and graduated from with a Master's of Science in Conservation Leadership through a joint program between Colorado State University and El Colegio de la Frontera Sur in Chiapas, Mexico. Damon works, he worked on his thesis in the Calakmul Biosphere in Yucatan. It's a tough one. I was jealous you got to go in Yucatan and study. It's beautiful out there. And now he's a volunteer with the Fish and Wildlife Service, like I mentioned. The next panelist we have is Colette Carmouche, and she's a cultural resource specialist at Prince William Forest Park. She's been there the past 6 years managing historical and archaeological resources. She holds a BA in Anthropology and African American Studies from University of Rochester. She also completed a certificate in historic preservation from Northern Virginia Community College and is pursuing a Master of Science in Conflict Analysis and Resolution from George Mason University. She also works on relevancy, diversity, and inclusion initiatives for the Park Service, which is a broad initiative called RDI. The third panelist is Anna Chukin. She's a biological science technician with the Park Service at Rock Creek Park here in DC. She was born and raised in the mountains of Peru, and that's where she realized her passion for conservation and natural resources. She graduated from the University of Maryland with a Bachelor of Science in Natural Resources Management. She attended Towson University to get her second BS in biology. She came up through the Park Service as a seasonal employee, then she went through the STEP program, the Student Temporary Employment Program, the SCEP program, Pathways program, and finally she was converted into a permanent position with the Park Service. And last but not least is Vanessa Torres, who's a familiar face to all of us here at DOI because she worked in the Youth Partnerships and Service Office for DOI. Prior to that, she served as Grand Teton's National Parks Diversity Outreach and Youth Engagement Coordinator. I thought I had a long title. But she was instrumental in developing the National Park Service's Academy program, which brings in diverse youth from across the country to learn about being a Park Service employee. She has a dual graduate degree from St. Mary's in San Antonio with a BA in Political Science and Master of Arts in Public Administration, and a Master's of Education from Ashford University. So that's our esteemed panel, and I'll turn it over to you all. The first question we asked you to address is some of the challenges you face getting onboarded into the department. So I'll start with, well, ladies first. So we'll start with Vanessa.
Hi, good morning. Still morning, yes, good morning. So challenges that I faced in getting into the department or the Park Service, I think my path was a little bit different than we'll hear from the rest of the panel. I started out as a intern with the National Park Service, my first job going up to Kenai Fjords and serving as a superintendent intern and being able to go to 2 weeks with every division that summer. So it really gave me a great depth of what the Park Service was, and it was an ability for me, who had never really been growing up going to parks, to really experience what the Park Service was and being able to fall in love with the agency itself and the people that worked for it. And so after that summer, continued as a STEP in the STEP program at Hubble Trading Post National Historic Site, and eventually coming into a SCEP position at Grand Teton National Park in 2008. And so from that, being able to come into a permanent position there at Grand Teton and spent 6 years with Grand Teton and being able to start programs on the ground and give others the opportunity to come in and experience what a park was for the first time. And so that was kind of my experience. I didn't really have too many challenges coming in. I think I've experienced more challenges moving up the career ladder now within the Park Service than I did actually getting into the Park Service.
Good morning, everyone. I think more of challenges for me, I see the challenges I see for students in general, and especially diversity students, are that perhaps the lack of more opportunities. I think the pathway that I followed was really good in terms of my career, and I wish that more students will have that opportunity. The opportunity to get to know a certain office, to get to know a certain area, a certain institution, and to start from the beginning, either as a STEP, as interns, a SCEP, now Pathways, and keep improving and keep getting up ahead in that ladder. I think that a lot of students don't know about that way, don't know that they can take that opportunity. Many do, but a lot don't. And I wish that more opportunities like that will come for the youth generation and for students that are just getting started on their college career.
Good morning. Kind of to follow along with what Anna is saying, I think another challenge and something that I experienced is that I really didn't know the Park Service existed. I'm from Houston, Texas, and as growing up, my family, we didn't have you know, some experiences a lot of my colleagues have, in that they have these awesome family vacations every year where they would travel to different park sites, go out west and see these amazing places. So I really didn't know that growing up, that the Park Service was an option. And it wasn't until, you know, I was in college and having friends that had those experiences, I kind of learned about it. But a good friend of mine had become a park ranger at the Petrified Forest in Arizona, and she was the one who actually suggested to me that I consider the Park Service. And I thought, you're crazy. Like, I don't want to work in the middle of nowhere. Like, that sounds awful. And it was really just, you know, I just really hadn't had that kind of experience or exposure to so many of the wonderful places that our country has. So she kind of schooled me and let me know, like, oh, and actually the Park Service protects, you know, historic sites, Martin Luther King site, all these places that really resonated with me. So I think that's, you know, a challenge and just awareness for people, especially across, you know, different cultures and races, knowing that the Park Service has sites that reflect our stories and our history, and they're relevant places to them.
Hello, everyone. I think the biggest challenge that I face or am facing right now, considering I am not actually employed by the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service at the moment, is that my interest in working for the federal government kind of happened a little later. So it was after I finished my undergraduate degree that I kind of considered the Fish and Wildlife Service as a potential employer. And I know of the step and skip kind of pathway towards careers, but you know, it was too late at the moment. So I kind of missed out on all those opportunities that there were for students. And I think that's kind of a challenge that a lot of people face. I think a lot of students these days don't know where they want to work or where they want to end up. And so once they get out of school and start figuring that out, the U.S. government or federal employment is not really an easy option to get into. And so I'm facing that right now, and I'm fortunate to be able to volunteer my time, but I know most students or most recent graduates probably don't have that kind of luxury. So yeah.
Great. Well, thank you all. Maybe we can go into a really good question. What are the challenges you're currently facing in regards to promotion and making sure we retain such quality talent like you all? Could you briefly describe some of those issues? Start with Vanessa.
Sure. So I'm in a unique situation currently where I'm on a long-term detail with the National Capital Regional Office. The detail ends at the end of March, which has left me with, once that detail ends, I have no office to go back to within the department. And so my current challenge is trying to apply on USA Jobs, and this was a little bit of what I was getting to at the beginning of my opening statement, was that challenge of having to apply. You're already in the government, you're in the system, having to apply through USA Jobs and get your name out there by using your network, and still having that difficulty of qualifying or being eligible for those positions. And so I think there's several glass ceilings or green ceilings, since we're in the environmental sector, that you want to that we could talk about. But the biggest things that I've noticed is once you hit that 9, that you kind of hit this glass ceiling, and then the same again with the 11. And so, and it's probably the same as you continue going up. But those are really the challenges that I have right now, is how do we continue to support the people that are already here, that are doing great work, and help them continue up that ladder, to keep them engaged and not lose that great potential that we have, especially around diverse audiences. How do we begin to look at them as an asset, and really all our employees as an asset, to keep them engaged in the work that they're currently doing?
I have just graduated not so long ago. I'm on my first year as a permanent employee. So at this point, I'm not seeing any challenge in terms of hiring and going up the step ladder. Just as continuing with what Vanessa said, and not necessarily only for diverse audience, but I consider for everyone that wants to go up the step ladder. following in the next years, I consider that there might be some difficulties also going up, not because of our qualities or our intellect, but because of what situation we are in the department. There are less and less opportunities, less and less job openings, and I foresee that might be a complication of a challenge going up in the ladder for the following years.
For me, I think I've been extremely fortunate in having a number of opportunities with my supervisor, my superintendent at the park, where I've gotten a lot of exposure. I've gotten really great training, and I was able to take part in a leadership program. So I feel very fortunate in those regards. I think the challenges I face are kind of, the what's next. And I think from coming to the Park Service and really learning about it and really wanting to experience some of these sites that I was once kind of leery of, I think that for me, an issue is kind of revolving around safety. And I had an experience going hiking at a park with some friends of mine, and we were hiking and a car drove by, and there was like a convertible or something, and someone in the car started yelling about white power. And I was very caught off guard, alarmed, and really frightened. And I think it kind of made me think about going to some of the parks, or really working and living in communities that are maybe more remote or rural. And I hadn't really thought before, but it was something that really made me take a closer look and think about, is this something that I'm ready to do? I'm also openly gay, and that also concerns me as well. And traveling someplace with my partner, and just wanting reassurance that it's going to be a safe place where I can live in a community and also thrive there. So those are the challenges for me at this point.
I think in my situation, a big challenge is just getting my foot in the door. I have applied for a couple of positions through USA Jobs, and I mean, that whole process is very impersonal, which is, I think, common through many other many other organizations, not just the US government, but the online application process is just a very impersonal one. And so, from all the things that I've applied for, I just either never hear back from them or get a computer response saying that I don't qualify, or that for the US government, that they have to consider, other special hiring authorities first, and so not even being considered for the position. So just, I am not seeing a whole lot of opportunities on the website at the moment. And like I said, I'm volunteering now, and I can do that for some amount of time, but there is a certain point where I need to kind of move on. If it's not a viable option to work for the Fish and Wildlife Service, I obviously have to move on to other options. So yeah, just getting my foot in the door has been a big challenge for me right now.
I think Damon brings up a good point. Being able to develop youth programs and work with this next generation that's trying to get their foot in the door, like Damon, we really come up to that problem of how do we, if you don't have time, you don't have the luxury to volunteer and be able to give that time to get experience, how do we get students in the door? And I think that's been one of our biggest challenges. We've had a lot of conferences and talked and done a lot of research on diversity and inclusion, but when do we begin to take action and move past just talking about it? And so I think it's really having managers and supervisors and those in those leadership positions realize the different hiring authorities that are available to us, and being able to make students aware of what the agencies within the department are and expose them to these agencies. And I think we have a lot of great programs already out there that are doing that, but what is that next step? How do we get those great students that are enthusiastic about the department and about the agencies and get them in the door and give them that opportunity?
In addition to that, I think we could divide it into two main groups: the groups that come and have the experience of working in the department, and the group that really wants to form a career and stick to the different institutions in which they are working and continue on. I think on top of what you're mentioning, having having a branch or developing a certain system in which students and young professionals can make a career in the department will be a following step.
Great. Well, that's a perfect segue into moving from challenges to discussing tools and recommendations you would give to hiring managers, and you've already started to describe some of those. And it's obvious that we need to provide mentorship, and not just senior level managers, but all employees should really provide mentorship to young students or folks who are interested in our field. Please, I'd love to hear more of your recommendations to hiring managers and others, what they could do, the little things to some big things, beyond sharing a posting on USA Jobs. What can we really do to make a difference?
As I mentioned before, I believe that my experience of being step-by-step pathways was a great incentive for me to learn about the Park Service and to have a sense of belonging there, to learn to love it, and to decide and wish to have a long career there. I wish that that could be the case for many students, especially diversity students that are just starting in their school and trying to figure out what they have to do. I think that those opportunities should be multiplied. I think there might be too few, but I think that students and young professionals will benefit a lot from this program, which is an excellent program, teaches and takes as much quality as possible from students. So I think Pathway program is a great program, but on the other hand, also, a lot of students or a lot of young graduates learn about it whenever they either graduate or whenever they are far away into their studies. A lot of them, and I think is the case for some of us here in the panel, had to go back to school in order to keep going with the project with the program. You will be also interested to show the program and to advertise the program more into four-level institutions, into grad schools, kind of do bigger effort into advertising and tell students that the government is also an option, and there are several different options that students can take and build a career. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, just to kind of build off what Anna was talking about, I think we need to I think managers or people who work in the federal government need to kind of build connections with either teachers or counselors, career counselors. I mean, a lot of universities and schools have really great resources for students, and they know the students that would be potentially interested in a career path like this. But if that connection's not being made, then the students aren't going to hear about these opportunities. And I think for me, I never considered federal government as an employer when I was in my undergrad. My advisors never really talked about it to me that much, and I didn't know about STEP or SCEP until after I graduated. So if we can make those connections with the universities, with the schools, high schools, even middle schools, then I think we can really put the word out there that this is a viable career path, and there are great opportunities, and there's great work to be done in these federal agencies.
Just to kind of add on to that as well, I think that building relationships piece is really critical in terms of connecting with colleges, universities, or groups that are able to reach some of these audiences. Like I mentioned before, I didn't grow up really knowing about the Park Service or anything that it offered. So I think at least for the Park Service, we're really trying to emphasize building connections with youth and having park rangers in schools, and so that hopefully we're building sort of a pipeline where, early on young people are getting those experiences, and maybe they'll consider in the future this is a career. But I think in the meantime, I think it's unfortunate, but I think a lot of the onus falls upon managers and supervisors putting in the extra effort to reach out and make those connections, and it's really time consuming. Honestly, I supervise youth interns, and that's part of the process that we go through in hiring, is just trying to reach out. And sometimes, we don't always get a very diverse, pool of applicants. But, it's just part of the ongoing process that we try and build into it to make it a little bit easier.
Colette, I think you hit it the nail right on the head. Looking at diversity recruitment has been such like I said earlier, we've talked about it so much. And the reality is that it does take a lot of time. If you're going to go outside the traditional aspect of USA Jobs, which has to be advertised, but how do you begin to spread that word to other audiences? And so looking at colleges and universities, going out and setting up a table, it's very time consuming. And the reality is that we're all overworked and we don't necessarily have that time, but are we willing to make that time? And that's the big question. Are you willing as a hiring manager, as a supervisor, to make that time, and take that extra effort to diversify your workforce? And so I think also being aware of the different hiring authorities, Public Land Corps Hiring Authority, Direct Hire Authority, Pathways, which we all know isn't the easiest path. And then looking at programs that already exist. You have a group of students, MPS Academy, for example, that is a program that I helped start that brings in college students, diverse college students from across the country, and introduces them into the Park Service, and they have internships during the summer. So these students already know the park culture, have already had experience, yet they are still having difficulty finding a job. And so how do we begin to look at that untapped potential that we might already have and bring them in using different hiring authorities, unconventional hiring authorities, to bring them in?
Great, thank you all. I think we'll take some questions, but before we do, I just want to mention that, if you're willing and if your office or bureau is really thinking about becoming more diverse, whether it's ethnic perspectives or thought, diversity all across the board, I think you should look towards your colleagues, especially folks here on this panel, myself and others in this room who can really provide you with the networks into those diverse communities, because we're untapped resources. It's not, you don't have to just jump right out there and start engaging the community, but rather rely on your peers and your colleagues to provide you those connections and some advice and support. And so I'm glad that we're here to offer our thoughts and ideas and support. And with that, I'll turn it over to Julia, see if anybody has any questions for our panel members.
Hi, I'm Christy Johnson, Hughes Fish and Wildlife Service. And I hear what you're saying. I was a volunteer for years, and then was a temp, and finally became permanent years later. So I hear what you're saying. One of the things that we're working on, I heard you say about leadership opportunities, and what has bothered me is that in Fish and Wildlife Service, we had a leadership program, but you have to apply for it and be selected for it. And I find that very limiting, because I think there are a lot of people who would benefit at all levels for leadership opportunities, but I think we're narrowing our opportunities here. And what I'd like to do is see a more open leadership opportunity. I know our Region 5, the Northeast region, is exploring that, but that's not been bought in by all of our regions or at headquarters here, and we're trying to expand that. I just wanted to follow up and ask, would a more open leadership program in an agency such as Fish and Wildlife Service be helpful to everybody in the agency from your perspective? Thank you, Julie.
Great question.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. I mean, I think, that's one of the, being able to have tools for people to meet them wherever they're at. In the Park Service, we kind of a similar format where we do have a couple different leadership programs, but you do have to apply and be accepted. But, trying to have more opportunities for wherever you're at, and also, that are going to meet you, based on your schedule, having things like webinars or multiple sorts of opportunities, so that you can kind of get in and pick up skills. Because we were kind of talking about this earlier, about having skills like emotional intelligence and being able to have the self-awareness to be able to identify if you have unconscious bias. That's something for everyone that we can be working on. So thank you.
I'll just add to that really quickly that I think your question's very complex. It's not an easy one to answer, but I think it goes back to being a hierarchical agency or organization. We are very much look at that leadership from the top down. And I think if we took a more servant leadership approach of where everyone's a leader and sometimes you have to follow, and giving that opportunity to everyone on all the ranks to be able to take that leadership training, I think that would be important.
Great. I think we have time for one more question or one more best practice.
Hi, my name is Stephanie West. I work with the Office of Surface Mining. My question is kind of twofold. So I've listened to you discuss, how you ended up in the National Park Service. And for many of you, the first question I have is, how did you learn about the program so that you could become involved? And the second part is, for those that are finding that it's too late to become an intern or to come in through a leadership program, what do you think the problem is? Is it outreach? And how can that be, how can we look at that to make more students aware of the programs available for federal service?
Sure, I'll start. So I came in through to the Park Service via a table career fair. There was a table set up at my school. Didn't have a job for the summer and was kind of wandering around, and they pulled me in, asked me if I liked the outdoors, and I was like, oh yeah, I love fishing. And they're like, what if you wanted to spend a summer on a boat in the outdoors and hike all the time? And I was like, that sounds amazing. Let's try that. And a couple months later, got that call to go up to Alaska, and it was my first time away from home, my first time on a plane, and I went 3,000 miles away. And so I think it's a little more complex than that. If we're looking at diverse audiences, a lot of times, at least for the Latino community, we're very nuclear, and so we're very much about staying home. You're not supposed to leave unless you get married, and I think that's changing a lot from the traditional aspect of it. Luckily, I did not grow up in that traditional home. My parents were all about education and about pushing me out and experiencing different opportunities, and so I was fortunate enough to be able to, that they were, push me out, go experience this, go to Alaska and have a great time. So that was how I got through a career fair.
I knew about the National Park Service because I live close to DC, so your normal trips to the National Mall, you get to see rangers there, but I never thought about a career in the National Park Service until the opportunity showed up in USA Jobs, believe it or not. So I put all my information into the black hole, and I was lucky enough to be called, which was completely unbelievable for me. I had been advised not to do it, not to waste my time doing it, because nothing will come out of it. And I was very surprised that I received a call. I joined and acted as a seasonal for a couple summers, and it's then when I learned about the Step-Escape opportunity. I did not know about that in college. Nobody had approached me, not even in job fairs or anything like that. It was only until I was in the service that I learned about such opportunities. So I think, as you said, outreach it's a key aspect in terms of showing people and telling people what Department of Interior is all about, what opportunities we have, not only introducing ourselves as a job opportunity, career opportunity, but just to introduce ourselves to who we are, what is our mission, what we do. There are a lot of students that don't have a clue. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and I'll just ditto all those comments. I found out about the Park Service through a friend, and I think, that was pretty much once I graduated college. So, I think if I had known about it earlier, maybe I would have gone the direction sooner, kind of thing. So I think the things that we're doing to, like everyone said, doing the outreach and making sure people know from early age that, these opportunities exist, I think can go a long way. So, and again, we might not see the fruits of that labor for a very long time, but I think it's a good path to start on.
So I found out I learned more about the Fish and Wildlife Service because after I graduated, I got an internship with the Wildlife Society, which was a joint internship with NCTC for the Fish and Wildlife Service. And after that, I was like, wow, this is a pretty cool place, and these are good people, and they do a lot of good work. So it definitely seems like a career path that I could maybe pursue. What I was thinking about for that last question, and what some of the other people have said, is just that I think there needs to be more opportunities for students and recent graduates, whether they're paid or unpaid. Just the more opportunities you have, I believe that the students and the young professionals will be there, and the more people you have that get to know the service or know the services, or can I build their skills, it increases the applicant pool of qualified individuals that will hopefully, a small percentage of them continue on to be really great employees for these services. So, just make the opportunities, and I think they will come. I think the employees will come.
Great. This has been a very enlightening panel. Thank you all for taking your time. I just want to end with, obviously we have these resources here, but there are plenty of colleagues I see in the room that can provide support if you're interested in becoming a more inclusive office. And again, it's not just for inclusiveness of Hispanic community, and that's why we have this very diverse panel. It's for all diversity and perspectives. And so I just wanted to thank you all, and please, outreach and engagement is important. Let us know how we can be helpful, and your colleagues here and Fish and Wildlife Service can be very extremely helpful. And so thank you to Fish and Wildlife Service, and I'll turn it over to them, and thanks to the panel.
Wow. Thank you so much, Vanessa, Colette, Anna, and Damon, because it's just enlightening. Myself, I started my career as a student way back when. I will not say when. Back when I had hair, as one of those co-op students, and came through the chain. So thank you, Francisco, and thank you everybody for your time. Thank you everybody over there across the nation through the webcast. And I think that my take-home message is that we need to have exposure, experiences, being open to expose the students and expose our agencies to the diversity. But one take-home message I take is that we need to be conscious about our unconscious bias. That's critical, especially when we get to management positions. All of those things, we need to be conscious about them when we are making decisions about hiring and opportunities. So with that, I would like again to say thank you, and thank you for your time.